This is another exciting episode of You.Gov. You.Gov gives you information about the government and you as a citizen. What are government functions and what are your obligations as a citizen? So it is all about education, all about information and enlightenment. We've been looking at various concepts of government. We've been looking at separation of powers as propounded by Baron de Montesquieu. And under separation of powers, we looked at the arms of government, we've looked at the executive, we've looked at the legislature, and now we're going to be looking at the judiciary. I am Olomu-Agbodo. You know more about the judiciary when we return from this break and take a listen to this educative clip on the arms of government. Don't go away.
Local Plus app is bigger and better. Watch all our shows with just a click.
Let him have the right to decide what happens with your body.
Watch inspiring, informative, and entertaining programs. You can comment, like, and share. Watch our live TV and web TV on your mobile devices. Watch the big stories in real time or when you have the time. Experience Local Plus app right now. Download Local Plus app on Android, iOS, and BlackBerry. Go to Google Play Store, Apple App Store, or Windows Phone Store. Welcome to the bigger picture. Local Plus, beyond television. With every story comes an inside story, shaping thoughts, opinions, and driving the conversation. Nations, governments, economies, and even the environment. The causes, consequences, or benefits. The analysis makes it clear. We take a close look at every possible angle. No matter the story, we take you inside the news.
Inside the News, showing on the station.
You're welcome back. This is still You.Gov, and we're looking at the judiciary this week as an arm of government. Under separation of powers, we did tell you that there are different arms of government: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. We've looked at the two other arms of government, and our focus this week is on the judiciary. Basically, the judiciary represents that body that interprets the laws made by the legislature. But we have interesting respondents who will be telling you more about the judiciary. Stay tuned.
The judiciary is the arm of government that deals with the law courts and the officials of the court. The officials of the court here refers to the judges, lawyers, the registrars, and other officials of the court itself. The judiciary's function basically is to interpret and apply the laws that have been made by the legislature, the laws that have been assented to by the executive. Is the judiciary's function to interpret these laws and to actually apply them. That is one of the major functions of the judiciary. But that is not the only function of the judiciary. The judiciary in itself is also saddled with protection of the people, because it is incumbent on the judiciary to ensure that the rights of the people are not trampled upon. It is the bastion of defense for the people. It's the judiciary that interprets and specifies the limits or the powers of the other arms of government. I'm talking about the executive and the legislature. It's a function of the judiciary to interpret where each of their powers start and stop. And this serves to protect the people. The judiciary also has a role in lawmaking. Primarily, the body empowered to make laws is the legislature. But how does the judiciary come into lawmaking? Judiciary comes into lawmaking by the process of interpretation of these laws, because it is when the judiciary has interpreted these laws that the laws can then take on a life of their own. So the judiciary has the liberty to interpret the laws in the legal way it deems fit. And by so doing, they are helping to fine-tune and recreate these laws. And that is a way that the judiciary, we say the judiciary is involved in lawmaking by their role of interpretation. And I said previously that the judiciary is a protector of the people. How? They protect human rights. It's the judiciary that ensures that the human rights of the people are not trampled upon. That is also a function of the judiciary, to be sure that when the people run to it, it is able to give them the protection that they deserve. It's the judiciary that curbs the excesses of the other arms of government or of any organ of the government. In Nigeria, the judiciary is established under Section 6 of the 1999 Constitution. The section gives the judiciary the powers to interpret and applies all the laws that have been made in the Federation. Now, under the judiciary, like I said before, the judiciary comprises the law courts and the officials of the court. What are these law courts? We have a number of courts in Nigeria. The highest court we have in Nigeria under the judiciary is the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court of Nigeria is the highest court in the land. Immediately below that, we have the Court of Appeal. Previously, it was called the Federal Court of Appeals, but right now, we've taken the term simply Court of Appeal. We have the Court of Appeal. Under the Court of Appeal, we have the High Court. The High Court, we have two forms of the High Court. We have what we call the Federal High Court and the State High Courts. The Federal High Court is a court that is under the powers of the federal government, while the State High Court are courts that are under the powers of each governor of the state, of the powers of the state. Then under the State High Courts, we now have a little divergence depending on whether you're looking at the judiciary from the northern part of the country or from the southern part of the country. In the south, we have what we call magistrate courts. And below that, we have customary courts. That is what we have in the south here. But when you go to the north, you have what we call the Sharia Court of Appeals. Their function is to adjudicate based on the Sharia code that obtains in the north, while the customary court is supposed to adjudicate based on the customs of the people. So basically, these are the courts that can be found under the judicial process. Now, who are the officers of the court that we earlier referred to? An officer of the court is a person that is qualified to appear in a court in Nigeria. I'm talking about lawyers. A lawyer in Nigeria is somebody who has achieved two things. He has passed his university exams. At that point, he is called a law graduate, and he has gone on to do 1 year of the Nigerian law school. And after that, he gets called to the bar. That's the point we call him a lawyer. So that's the point he becomes a member of the judiciary and officer of the courts. Then in the judicial system, we also have the police. The police too, they are also judicial officers, because by the Police Act and under the Constitution, the police also has powers to initiate court processes in court, just like lawyers. They also have the powers to represent the government in court processes. Now, in Nigeria, we have what we call the Ministry of Justice. The Ministry of Justice is a ministry that is empowered to administer the judicial arm of government. And the Ministry of Justice is headed by the Minister of Justice. In Nigeria, we've brought two offices together. The Office of the Attorney General of the Federation and the Office of the Minister of Justice currently resides, the offices currently reside in one person. So in Nigeria, we have the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of the Federation. This is the head of the administrative arm of the judiciary. Now for the courts themselves, we have a different head. The courts themselves, starting from the Supreme Court down to the inferior courts. The Supreme Court From the High Court to the Supreme Court, we have what we call superior courts of record. From the Magistrate Court, the Sharia Court of Appeal in the north, down, we have what we call the inferior courts. The head of the courts in Nigeria, whether superior or inferior courts of record, is the Chief Justice of the Federation. The Chief Justice of the Federation is the most senior judge in the Supreme Court. And normally, in the Supreme Court, when the Supreme Court sits on a matter, a full quorum of the Supreme Court depending on the subject matter at hand, is either 5 justices or 7 justices. Those are the justices that are qualified to form a panel of the Supreme Court. Going to the Court of Appeal, which I said is the next court in the land, the Court of Appeal sits with 3 justices. The 3 justices form a full panel of the Court of Appeal. The High Court, whether the State High Court or the Federal High Court, they sit with 1 judge. A single judge sits on the High Court, and from the High Court down to the least court, we have a single judge taking the place of the arbiter at this court, whether it be the Magistrate Court, the Customary Court, the Sharia Court of Appeal, or whatever other court that we have in Nigeria. Now, there is, in some instances in Nigeria, another area of the judiciary that is not so pronounced. We call them tribunals. Previously, we had a lot of tribunals under the military era, like the Firearms Tribunal, like the Bank of Offences Tribunal. But after the promulgation of a law that scrapped tribunals, in Nigeria we have the Tax Appeal Tribunal, which is one of the tribunals currently established and operating in the country. The Tax Appeal Tribunal is an administrative body that has been established for tax cases where a person feels aggrieved by an assessment of either the Federal Inland Revenue Service, the State Inland Revenue Services. They appeal to what we call the Tax Appeal Tribunal, and appeals lie from the Tax Appeal Tribunal to the Federal High Court. Now, I also want to speak about the difference between the Federal High Court and the State High Courts. The powers of the Federal High Court, they are powers that are stated in Section 251 of the 1999 Constitution. That's the Constitution that governs Nigeria. The Federal High Court is basically, primarily, a court that is established to adjudicate in cases between individuals and federal agencies. Once a case is federal, as in once you are coming against an agency of the federal government, for example, you are bringing a case against the Nigerian Police Force, or you are bringing a case against the Federal Inland Revenue Service, you are supposed to bring it to the Federal High Court, which has jurisdiction over federal offenses. For a more detailed breakdown of the actual powers of the Federal High Court, you see that under Section 251 of the Constitution. Now, the reverse provision of the Constitution that caters for the State High Courts can be found under Section 272, Section 272 of the Constitution. There, you see the powers of the State High Courts. Now, for all the matters listed under Section 251 of the Constitution, the State High Courts cannot entertain those matters. Those matters are barred from being entertained by the State High Courts. The State High Courts entertain matters that have not been exclusively catered for under Section 251 of the Constitution. That is a major difference between those two courts, and it is also a major point to note in our judicial process. In Nigeria, it is the 1999 Constitution, and the body empowered to protect and ensure that the tenets and the principles and the laws of the Constitution are not being breached by any person or body is the judiciary. So the judiciary is the last recourse or the last point of call for the Nigerian citizen.
That was Barrister Uzeme telling us about the judiciary. We have another respondent who will throw more light on the functions of the judiciary. Stay tuned.
The judiciary is one of the 3 arms of government in a democracy whose constitutional role is the interpretation or laying down or pronouncement of the law. As you know very well, you have the executive that enforces or execute the laws, and you have the legislature that makes the laws. The responsibility of interpreting or giving meaning to the letter of the law is that of the judiciary. And this is carried out by the courts and all of the stakeholders in the judicial process. Courts have their hierarchies, starting even from the district and customary courts all the way to the magistrate courts, and of course the high courts. The high courts could include the federal high court, state and federal high courts, and the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court. They have the Sharia courts as well. These are all part of the judiciary. Their responsibility is to adjudicate, between in the event of disputes, as they always arise, between individuals, and individuals here would include artificial persons, as it were, other natural persons, as well as between individuals or artificial persons and agencies of government, or even government itself. It could be a local government, it could be the state government, it could be the federal government, and even between states, between dispute between states, and dispute between states and the federal government, and between local government and the states. So essentially, that is the constitutional role of the judiciary. Now, I talked about the courts. Who are these officers that man the courts? You have the various, depending in the customary courts, you have judges of the customary courts, and of course of that of the Sharia courts. And at the magistracy, you have the magistrate. At the level of the high courts, talking about state and federal high courts, you have the judges. At the level of the Court of Appeal, you have the full panel of the Court of Appeal of 3 judges. At the Supreme Court, you could have a full panel of 7 or an honorary panel of 5 judges. And the other stakeholders are the legal practitioners, who appear in this court to represent people who are either accused, or depending on the court, those who are accused either as those who are either as defending them or as prosecuting them. The other people you have at the level of the magistracy are the police, who are not necessarily lawyers. You also have police lawyers who prosecute at that level, but you have the policemen who prosecute matters for the police at that level of the magistracy. But at the level of the high court and above, the ordinary policeman who is not a legal practitioner cannot appear. They're either for the purpose of prosecution. So you have those people, and of course the honorary staff of the courts, the registrars of the courts, and the orderlies of the courts. So essentially, that's what the role of the judiciary is in a democracy. And basically, as I've said, all of the stakeholders and these institutions that are mentioned that constitute the judiciary, adjudicate in matters between individuals, and I've mentioned who these individuals are, and essentially with a view to laying down the law, with a view to interpreting what the law says concerning the dispute which would have been brought before the court. And the essence of this is to ensure that there is a smooth running of the system, and that there's no anarchy, and that the rule of the law prevails. That's basically what the role of the judiciary is.
Well, interesting speakers out there telling us about the judiciary, the functions, the role they play. Basically, what we can glean for their comments is that the judiciary upholds the law, they interpret the law, and they basically ensure that there's peaceful resolution of disputes in the society. Indeed, every arm of government have their role to play. Now we usually go to the streets to hear what our people have to say out there. And that is what we call the Street Teacher segment. Stay with us. Every week on You.Gov, we bring you opinions of experts in various fields of government. We also try to balance it out by bringing you opinions of people on the streets.
Elements of the coat of arms of Nigeria, peace and unity, all this love, peace and unity.
What are the colors of our flag?
It's red and white now.
The national anthem. I can try now, but it's been long.
Just try.
National anthem. I rise to compatriots. Are we?
Yes.
Nigeria's color be gather our leaders' strikes. I don't forget to.
Can you sing the national anthem?
No, I can't sing that.
What about the pledge?
I can't do that now.
So can you sing the national anthem?
That's serious.
I pledge to Nigeria, my country, to be useful and honest. Oh, I've forgotten.
And that is what we call the Street Teacher. Stay tuned.
The only thing, or let me say, the most important thing I know about the judiciary is just we talk about the law, the interpretation and the implementation of our constitution. That is the major thing I know about the judiciary. The function, well, just like what I said, I know about the judiciary. The function is majorly to educate people on the position of the constitution, and when issues that arise, application of the constitution do arise, they are there to actually take that place and interpret the law to solve issues.
The judiciary is a system of government that deals with implementing rules and regulations. That's the laws of the land. What I mean implementing, say for example, like the court system, the high courts, the appeal courts, the supreme court, or the other courts, that's the lower courts. Now, the legislation, there are laws that are made by the legislatures. Now, any offender also will be tried. So the judiciary actually serves as a medium at which such laws tries a person whether it violates such rules and regulations, and then make recommendations. If it's guilty, person is found guilty, they penalize in terms of fines, in terms of maybe imprisonment and so on. That if the person is found innocent of such, then it's acquitted. And the judiciary could be on either criminal or civil case.
Wow, interesting speakers out there on our Street Teacher segment. They always have what to say. They always have interesting responses. And indeed, the judiciary upholds the law, interprets the law, and ensures that there's peace in the society, ensures that there's justice and fairness. We have some more tidbits for you. Do stay with us. Well, it's been an exciting season of You.Gov. We've looked at various concepts of government. We've looked at democracy. We've looked at rule of law. We've looked at taxation. We've looked at citizens and their obligations. You know, this program is all about government functions and responsibilities, as well as citizens' obligations. We'd like to hear from you. So for updates or comments that you have, your observations, go to www.loveoplus.org. You can also join us on You.Gov on King's Chat. Indeed, we'll have a super user page on King's Chat where you can use the hashtag You.Gov, and we'll see your comments, we'll see your observations. We really like to hear from you. It's been a full season of different exciting topics on government. And I am Itsohan Olomu-Agbodo saying bye for now.